Welcome to this course, Animate a Music Video in Cinema 4D. I'm Pete Merrick from Cleveland, Ohio, and will be your instructor. I've taught thousands of 3D artists over the years through Cuyahoga Community College, the Cleveland Institute of Art, and various online platforms. After completing this course, students will gain the skills necessary to animate their own music video, complete with sound, visuals, and effects. The topics that will be covered include sound design using GarageBand and other music options, scene setup, animation using the sound effector demonstrated with 5 unique examples, animation bonus lessons using Hair and Espresso, camera composition, lighting, rendering, and post-production techniques in Adobe After Effects. I designed this course for the beginner to intermediate 3D artist who wants to easily animate music videos and seamlessly sync sound to visuals. A basic understanding of Cinema 4D's user interface is recommended. Ready to learn how to animate a music video in Cinema 4D? Enroll today on Skillshare. Let's get started on animating a music video in Cinema 4D. The first thing I want to show you is a completed animation. In this course, we're going to primarily cover the sound effector and how to use it within Cinema 4D. Before we get started, I just wanted to talk about planning your project. One of the things that I like to do is come up with a rough storyboard, something that gives me an idea of what kind of shapes I want to use, what kind of compositions I want to use, and what kind of animation that I want in my final video. This is subject to change once you start getting into Cinema 4D. Your final animation might not end up exactly like your storyboard. So you might want to take a few minutes, sketch out some ideas of what you want your concepts to look like in your final animation. The next thing that I want to do is establish a color scheme. So the way that we can do that is we can go into Adobe Color, and right here where it says Explore, this will give you a lot of different options as far as color schemes. You could type in keywords and search for whatever keywords that you want. Once you find a color scheme that you're happy with, what you can do is just click on the scheme and take a screenshot of this, and this will give you all these numbers down here that you could type in to Cinema 4D's material to give you these exact colors. So here's the final scheme that I chose for my animation. Yours could be completely different than this, and that's okay, but let's just establish a color scheme right up front before we get started. Okay, let's discuss the sound file. So I want to give you a few options as far as where to get the sound. So the first thing that you could do, if you feel like it, you could create your own music within GarageBand or any other program that you're comfortable with. You can use the sound files that I'll supply for this project. You can purchase royalty-free files through like Premium Beat or any other online resource, or you can find free resources online. So right now I'm going to jump into GarageBand, just show you how I organize my file. So if I solo this first intro, I'll just play that for you. So once that intro completes, then I have, this sort of electronic band kicking in, and I have some basic arpeggios that I made over here, and if you don't understand any of this, it's fine. Like I said, you can use the sound file that I supply. I have a real simple melodic line, some drums, and then some bass. So once that kicks in, here's what happens. All right, I won't play the whole thing, but you get the idea. If you wanted to create your own custom music track within GarageBand, a few simple ways that you could do it is if I go File, New, I can save that, empty project. I'm going to start with a drummer. Okay, let's create this. And GarageBand will allow you to choose different types of drummers. So if I click electronic, let's go ahead and play this and see what this guy sounds like. You can also select different presets down here. So if I rewind this to the beginning, that'll give me a totally different groove. Here's another one. All right, and you can choose whatever one that you want here. Once you have a basic drum pattern, you can also go up here where you have these loops, where the loop browser is on the top right, and you can search by genre. So if you go into electronic, this is going to give you a whole bunch of different loops that you can use within your composition. So you can go through, click on some of these, and see what they sound like. And if you find ones that you like, what you can do is you go File, New Track. Let's just use this microphone. And then what I can do is I can go back into this loop browser and I can just simply drag and drop some of these loops into here. And then I can start building my track that way. Okay, you're going to want to have about 30 to 60 seconds worth of music. So for right here, we could click on here and just show time, and that'll show us the duration of our music track. All right. So if you feel inclined and you want to write your own music, that's a quick and easy way to do it. If not, again, you can use my sound files. So I'll go back and open up my sound file again. Once you have your music created, what you could do is you could solo and export all these individual elements so you can have different parts of the animation be affected by different sound. So the way that I can do that is I'll just mute all of these tracks down here. And then we can go Share, Export Song to Disk. And since this is the only one that's on, this intro, it'll just export that sound to disk. So let's go Export Song. And we can just call this Intro. Save it to the desktop. And a WAV format is usually the best. So I'll just export that. And then you can go through and let's say we turn that off. We can export this next one. Share, export song to disk. And then what you want to do at the end is export the entire track. Okay, so turn all these back on, share, export song to disk, and that'll be the full track. So the sound files that I'll supply for this is I'll give you the full track, I'll give you the introduction, main arpeggio, a melodic line, percussion, and the bass line. Okay, and feel free to use those. Let's go ahead and set up our scene. First thing I'm going to do is create some new materials by clicking this material editor. What we'll want to do for this is just reference these numbers down here within our color scheme. So if I double click, create a new material, what I'm going to do is go into this color, and right here I'm going to click this little number sign, and here I can input those values. Hit tab, and there's my color. So one of the things that I wanted to suggest for this animation is to keep your materials super simple. So if you start adding a lot of reflection on your materials, it's going to bump up your render times. And since 3D simulation and dynamics sometimes take a while to render, I would recommend your materials to be as simple as you can. You can even turn off this reflectance if you wanted to, or you could just leave this specular layer on. Whatever you wanted to do. So I'm going to keep these materials super simple. Once we have the first material created, we could just duplicate it by hitting Command C, Command V, double click this, and I'll go into my color, and I'll just input that number for the next color here. So go through, duplicate these materials, create the rest of your colors. So after you have all your materials created, let's go ahead and close this material manager. Then we'll start building our scene. So for my particular scene, I kept it super simple, and I encourage you to make your own. So I started this off with just creating a whole bunch of landscape objects. I resized these, push these over a little. So let's say our camera view is going to start from here. I can duplicate this over here. Maybe change the seed of the second one. Go up to the seed, and that'll change the shape of this landscape. There we go. Maybe I could change the height right here. Then I'll go into my top view, just duplicate this again, rotate this one, and just go into here and move that over slightly. I can make that a little bit less tall. I can change the seed again of this one. That'll change the shape of that. Duplicate that over one more time and change the height. And now what I could do is I could create some sort of floor down here. Command C, Command V, and I'll rotate this guy. Push that over here, and I'll just rotate this 180 degrees and just push this down a little bit. I can even turn off this grid if I wanted. Filter, workspace, turn that off. So here's the basic scene. Maybe even make this a little bit longer. There we go. I could just group these landscapes together. And G, call this landscapes. And I'll put some materials on here. Let's say these are dark. And let's say this one on the bottom is a little bit lighter. And again, your scene might change. It might not be exactly like mine. That's okay. And the last thing I'm going to do for the scene is I'll just create a basic plane. This is going to be my water. Push this up just a little bit. There we go. And I'm just going to find a liquid material within the asset browser. Just go to my materials, search for water, and you can use any one of these materials. Just go ahead and download this one, and I'll just place this on my water plane. So that's the basic scene. One other thing that you could do here is where we have this water. If you want to get some waves in this water, an easy way that you can do that is go into the deformers over here, and you can use a displacer deformer. So you can drop that as a child of this water. Then in this displacer deformer, in the shading, you could choose a noise. And what that's going to do is it's going to start displacing this. Actually, if I take off this material, you could start seeing that a little bit better. So what that does is it starts displacing this up and down per that noise, and it makes it look like it's a little bit wavy. If you're not getting enough subdivisions, you can always go back into your plane and add a little bit more subdivisions to this. That'll give you some more waves. And if it's looking a little bit too jagged, you could put this water plane inside of a subdivision surface. That's going to increase render time as well, so I might just keep this super simple like this and call it a day. In this video, I wanted to give you a basic overview of how the sound effector works in Cinema 4D. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a real simple cube, and I'll scale this down, and then I'm going to go ahead and drop this inside of a MoGraph cloner. So I'll create a cloner, make this cube a child of the cloner, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this cloner object, and I can move this stuff over so you can see this a little bit better. So right here where it says mode, I'm just going to change this to linear. I'll zero out this Y position and just kind of offset these in the X, and I'll increase the counts of this cloner. All right, so we have some cubes and we have the cube inside of a cloner, and that's duplicating those cubes. So with this cloner selected, what we're going to want to do is go up to MoGraph, Effector, and choose the Sound Effector. So when we select this cloner and go to the Effectors tab, we'll see that the Sound Effector is located within that tab. Let's go to the Sound Effector, and right here it says Soundtrack. I can move this over again so you can see this a little bit easier. Soundtrack. Let's go ahead and load sound. And for this, I'm just going to use the full track just to demonstrate. So the way that this works is within the sound effector, if you go to parameter, you could specify how that sound is going to affect these clones. So right now, by default, we have the position enabled. For this demo, let's just go ahead and enable scale. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this Y scale, I just want this to increase per that sound. And right now I'm just typing in an arbitrary value. We can go back to this effector tab, and now when I rewind, hit play, you'll notice that nothing's happening with my cubes. If we go into the sound effector tab, right here where it says amplitude, you can go ahead and you could specify a portion of your sound wave that you want to affect your clones. So now when I drag this over here, you'll notice something's starting to happen with these clones. I'll hit play again. And you'll notice, per the sound effects parameters, we enabled scale, and we typed in this arbitrary value of 28, 30, whatever it is. And now these cubes are growing when the sound affects them. Okay? So if I rewind, play that again. You can also set a parameter within the sound effector to affect all of these cubes a little bit differently. So if you go down to sampling, right here where it says peak, let's go ahead and change that to step. And immediately you notice that it affects it differently. So now if I hit play, we get a different look. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and add some more frames to this, 500 frames, so we can play this through and see what happens. So as you can see, now these clones are being affected. If we go up to this amplitude again, if we play with this slider, again, you're going to notice that it affects our clones a little bit differently. Okay, so you're just going to have to get in here into this amplitude and start playing around with some of these values until you get the look that you want. Okay, one other thing that I wanted to point out, I'll play this real quick. You'll notice we're getting some jaggedy kind of animation, and one way to smooth that out is by using this decay slider right here. So if I take this decay and I bump that up, let's say 50% or so, what it's going to do is once these get to the peak, it's going to kind of ease out of that movement and make it a little bit smoother. So let me show you how that changed the animation. So now those are coming back to their original size a little bit slower. Okay, demonstrate again. Here's what it was before, kind of jittery. And now if I bump up that decay, it's a lot smoother. So if you go too far with this decay, these will start to stick. So you don't want to go too far. You know, you want to have these come back to somewhere in their original position. All right. The other thing that you could do is you can go into the sound effector in this parameter. You can enable position. You can enable rotation. So if we enable rotation, let's just play around with some of these and see how that affects this animation. Feel free to take some time, play around with some of these parameters, and see how they affect the overall animation in the clones. let's start animating some geometry. So the first thing I'm going to do is bump up my frame count. My music is about 1 minute and 10 seconds long, so 2100 frames should work. Yours might be different than that. You'll have to figure that out. 30 frames per second times however many seconds that you have for your music track. All right. So the first thing we're going to do here is I'll create a cube, and I'm going to resize this cube. Something like this, and then I'm going to put this inside of a cloner. I'm holding down Option on the keyboard. I'm on a Mac, and that makes the cube a child of this cloner. So what I'm going to do is go to my object, linear, and this is very similar to the previous video, and we'll zero out this Y position, and I'm just going to increase this count. I'm going to increase the size on the X. All right, and now I could just increase the count here. I could take my cloner and I could just move this over. So I want these to happen right underneath this water. So I can go into this view, garage shading, and I'll just take this down so it's underneath my water. Yours could be different than this. I think I'm going to increase this number, X, kind of offset these a little bit more. I don't think I need as many spheres, sorry, cubes. And then I can make these cubes a little bit smaller, something like this. And I'll drop, let's say, this green texture on this cube. And now, with this cloner selected, I can go ahead and create a MoGraph sound effector. Okay, so let's take the sound effector, go into the effector tab, right here where it says soundtrack, go ahead and load a sound, and for this I'll use the intro sound. All right, and for the parameter I want to use the scale, and this time I'll scale it in the Z. Okay, let's go ahead and play this and see how that's being affected. It's not being affected barely at all. So I have to take this amplitude slider. There we go. Slide that over so these waveforms start affecting our clones. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead into this parameter, and I'm going to increase the Z size. Maybe something like this. There we go. And then I'll go into the sound effector, and instead of using the sampling as a peak, I'm going to do a step. And now when I play this, I get this animation happening. I'm going to go into this decay slider and just bump this up to about 50%. Maybe I want this a little bit less. I think that's looking pretty good. So now what I can do is just take this sound and this cloner, and I'll group these together. I hit Option G on the keyboard, and I'll just call this 01 cubes underwater. So here's a little tip that's going to help you speed up your playback and speed up some of your renderings. So once you have your sound effector and cloner all set up and you're happy with the results, what you're going to want to do is cache this MoGraph animation. All right, so with this cloner selected, let's go up to Create, Tag, MoGraph Tags, and select MoGraph Cache. All right, so now with this selected, I can go ahead and bake this out. Okay, I'm going to save this. So what I'm going to do within my project folder, within my 3D folder, I'll just create a new folder called Cache. All right, and now over here, I'm going to specify that folder to save my cache into. All right, projects, 3D cache, and I'll just call this 01. Now with this MoGraph cache tag selected, you'll want to hit Bake to File. So what that allows us to do is to scrub through our animation timeline without any discrepancies in the actual animation. So when Cinema 4D has to calculate every frame, when you don't have this MoGraph tag, it could take a long time. You could get unexpected visual results. So it's always nice to bake this out. That way you'll always get the correct preview when you're scrubbing through your animation. Let's continue creating some additional animation. All right, so for this one, I'm going to start off with a sphere. I'll go ahead and I'll resize this, just make this a little bit smaller. And then I'm just going to duplicate this 2 times by hitting Command C, Command V, Command C, Command V. All right, and now I'm going to place these 3 inside of a cloner. Let's go ahead and apply some texture to these. So I'll take one and I'll do a light color. I'll do this next color, and I'll do this. All right. So now in this cloner, I can go ahead and bump up some of these parameters in here. All right. And now I'm going to go ahead and create a sound effector. So with this cloner selected, MoGraph, effector. And again, I'm going to load this file in the effectors, and I'm going to do the same intro file. Okay, and here I'm going to specify, instead of position, I'm going to do a scale. And I'll do a uniform scale, and I don't know, I'm just going to start with an arbitrary number and see how this plays out. All right, so let's go to this effector and this amplitude, and I'm just going to push this over and see what happens. So the first thing that I want to change is I want to go into this sound effector, and the sampling I'm going to change to step. All right. So now all these are slightly different. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is go to this cloner, simulation, and add a rigid body tag to this. So now when I hit play, you'll notice what's going to happen. I think this is probably way too big as far as this effector scale, so let's just go ahead and take that down a little bit. Something like this. So getting back to this rigid body tag, so now when I hit play, these are going to drop. Yep, they just drop all over the place. But what we want these things to do is attract to the center of this cloner. All right. So I'm going to go into this cloner, and right where it says size for these, I'm going to start with a 0, 0, 0 size. All right. So these will explode out and fall to the ground. Eventually fall to the ground. So the way that we can make these stick to the center of this cloner is pretty simple. If we go into this rigid body tag, and right here in this force tab, let's go ahead and type in, we'll start with 10 for follow position. And let's see how that affects it. There we go. So that's looking pretty good. Go back to the sound effector. I could play with this amplitude a little bit. Let's see if this changes anything over here. And we can also go back into this decay and see what happens now. And that's pretty good. So once we get this looking like we want it, again, we could take these two, we can group them together, and I'll just call this 01 spheres, since this is still the intro, and we could start composing our shot. So let's say our camera will maybe be somewhere around here. So if I create a camera in here, look through this camera, I can go to the composition and enable grid, And let's just start composing this shot. Maybe these are right in the center of this. And this is going to be completely up to you how you compose this. I could take these and I could push these back in space. We'll have to be on frame 0 to do that. And push those back in space. I could push them up a little bit, so maybe they start right around here. And let's hit play. If we wanted more spheres, we can go into this cloner, add more spheres here. That's going to be completely up to you. Once you get this animation and you're happy with the way it looks, you're going to want to go into this cloner again, go to Create, Tag, MoGraph Tags, MoGraph Cache, and then you're going to want to save this to your cache folder, wherever that is, right here. We'll just save this as O2. It's probably better. Now with this MoGraph cache tag selected, you'll want to hit Bake to File. Okay, let's go ahead and create some more animation. So I'm going to go ahead and create a plane. And I'll take this plane and I'll just move this down. What I'm going to do here is turn on Display Garage Shading Lines so I can see how many lines and subdivisions are in this plane. And then I'll just scale this up. Something like this. And I can move this down. So it's kind of aligned with the water. It doesn't have to be exact. Push that back. Push that over. I could just turn off my environment. And now I'm going to create an additional sphere. I'll resize this, make it a little bit smaller. And now I'll drop that sphere inside of a cloner. And in this cloner, where it says mode, I'll change this to object mode. And now we'll get an object field down here. I'll drop this plane inside the object field. And right away you'll notice that these spheres start cloning right along the surface of this plane. That's because this distribution method is on surface. But I'm going to change this to vertex. And then these spheres are going to snap to each vertice. Alright? So maybe we can make these spheres a little bit smaller. I'll just scale that down a little bit more. Okay. We could turn our environment back on. And what I could do here is turn this plane off. We don't want to see this plane in the view. And then I'm going to go ahead, create a new material here, and all this is has the luminance channel turned on and nothing else turned on, and then I chose a color for this luminance because I want these to kind of glow. So I'll just drop that on the sphere. And so now I could just turn off this environment so I could see what we're doing. Turn everything else off. And go to displays, go back to garage shading. Excellent. So now with this cloner selected, let's go up to MoGraph Effector and choose a sound effector. And now for this one, I'm going to go ahead and choose this load sound, and I'm going to choose this 03 main arpeggio. Alright, and then let's go ahead and play with this amplitude. And this is not going to play for several frames. Actually, we can hear this intro animation still. Let's go here. We'll just jump through the timeline, and we'll select some of these waveforms. And now in the sound effector, I'm going to offset this in the Z. And let's see what happens now. If I hit play. That's pretty good. Let's go hit play again. I could probably turn this environment back on to see how far these are coming up. Maybe this needs to be a little bit more. You'll have to play with your scene. I think that's pretty good right about there. And also what I'm going to do in the sound effector is I'm going to do scale. So here, I also want the scale to grow. So as these are coming up, I want them to kind of grow a little bit. Okay? Alright, so now in the sound effector, I'm going to go to my fields, and I will select a spherical field. Now what this is going to do is it's going to only affect the spheres that are within the radius of this field. See that? So now these are coming up where they're affected by this field. All right, and I'm just moving this. So what I can do here is on the spherical field, I'll right click and I'll choose animation tags and vibrate. Okay, so within this vibrate tag, I'll go ahead and enable position, and let's hit play. You'll notice this just vibrates back and forth. So I'll do X and maybe Z. So let's hit play again. Maybe we need a little bit more. You'll have to play with these parameters, see what works for your scene. There we go. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Bring some of these parameters down. Again, play with it, see what works for you. All right, looking pretty good. I'll go back to the sound effector. And what I'm going to do here is just increase this delay a little bit. That's pretty good. Let's see what happens if we change this to step. Does anything happen? Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to take all of these and I'm just going to Option G on the keyboard, and I'll call this 02 spheres on water, and save my scene. Okay, let's go ahead and reuse this plane to create a grid. So now with this plane selected, what I'm going to do, let's turn off our environment again so we can see this. Let's turn this plane on. And now I'm going to drop this inside of an array object. So if I go atom array, take this plane, drop it inside here. What that does, I could turn these off just so we could see that. It just creates this little grid. All right. And we can go to this atom array and just, I don't know, let's type in 0.75 and 0.75. I think that's going to work. How about 0.5? I think that's better, a little bit less. All right, good. Texture this, so I'll just grab a green. You could do the luminance material if you wanted. I'm just going to keep it at this. Now what I want to do is as these spheres come up, I want this grid to kind of grow and follow those spheres, okay? So I'll group this together or put this in a null. I'll call this O2 grid. And now I'm going to go up to MoGraph and create a poly effects. I'll drop this inside of that null. And with this poly effects selected, I'm going to go ahead and go MoGraph effector plane effector. Okay, so now what that does is it kind of breaks this up a little bit. So I'm going to go to the parameter. And we can change this position or turn off the position. We could do a rotation if we wanted. There we go. And we could do a scale. Let's do a uniform scale and we'll do -1. So now that grid disappears. All right. So I'll take this, drop it inside of here. And now I'm going to go ahead and take this plane effector and I will create another. So now let's make sure this spherical field is in line with this other spherical field. So I'll take this spherical field, go to coordinates, copy my position X, Y, and Z. I'll just hit copy, and I'll go to the spherical field, and I'll hit paste. Okay, now I can just make this a little bit bigger. And now I'm going to take this vibration, and I'm going to command, click, and drag to put that vibration tag on this spherical field. So now that spherical field will move in the exact same fashion as this other spherical field. So if I hit play, you'll notice this grid is kind of disappearing over here. So I want to change this spherical field on this plane. So I'll go to remapping and just do invert. Okay, So now I can just take this, grow this out if I wanted. There we go. So now as those spheres come up, that grid will grow with it. Let's animate some background elements. So we'll start this lesson off with a helix. All right, and now what we're going to do with this helix is we're going to make the height 0, and we're going to take this, we're going to push it back in space somewhere behind these landscapes. And we can look through this camera just so we can get a sense of how big this thing is relatively to everything else. And we can take this helix and let's go ahead and start tweaking some of these parameters. I can go ahead and turn off these fields in this view just so I can see what I'm doing. End radius, bring that up. Let's see what that looks like in the perspective view. It's pretty good. Maybe I could just increase this end angle, add a few more of these, increase this end radius, and that's looking pretty good. So at this point, what I'm going to do is create a cylinder, and I'll orient this plus Z. Maybe I can make this a little bit bigger. There we go. And I will create a sphere, and I can scale this down a little bit. And now I'm going to take a cloner, throw the cylinder and the sphere inside of there. And in this cloner, I'm going to change this mode to object. And in this object field, I will drop this helix in there. So now these pieces of geometry are cloning to this helix. If I go to this cloner, I can go to transform, and I can rotate some of these elements so they're facing the camera. So let's rotate that 90 degrees. And in this cloner, instead of distribution counts, I could do an even, and then I could just bump up that number till it fills these like that. Maybe this cylinder needs to be a little bit bigger. I'll just hit T on the keyboard, scale that up. Maybe this counts needs to be a little bit more. All right, it's looking pretty good. So now with this cloner selected, I'll go up to MoGraph, Effector, Sound Effector. Now in the sound track, I will load a sound, and you can use whatever sound that you want for this. So I'll take this amplitude, and I'll just have this effect. This for the time being, we might need to adjust it later. And for this position, I'll turn that off, and I'll affect the scale, do a uniform scale, just bump these up a little bit. There we go, and let's see what that looks like. All right, so if we go into the sound effector, let's go down to this sampling, and let's try step. Let's see what that looks like. And I'll take this decay, I'll turn that up. Let's see what that looks like. Well, it's looking pretty good. And now I'm going to use something else called a delay effector. And what that's going to do, it's going to ensure that these clones don't start animating abruptly. So with the sound effector, with this cloner selected, I'm going to go up to MoGraph, Effector, and just use delay. And then I'm going to go to this parameter, uncheck rotation. There we go. Now we have a little bit of a smoother animation. We can go to the sound effector again and play with some of these parameters until I'm happy with it. We can even do a negative value if I wanted. Let's see what happens there. That looks kind of cool. Let's play that. I think that's looking pretty good. And now if we wanted, we can duplicate some more of these cylinders so we have more cylinders than spheres. And then we would go ahead and add some color to these. We have some dark ones in here as well. And maybe this sphere is this blue color. And then we have another animation. So I'll just group this together. And I'll call this background. And you probably want to go through this cloner and bake that animation as well. Okay, in these next couple videos, I want to show you some additional techniques that don't use the sound effector, but you might find useful for your scene. You don't have to use every single technique that I've demonstrated in these videos. Use your discretion, use what works for your scene and your animation. All right. So one of the things I wanted to show you is animating hair. So if you create a sphere, let's just resize this. I can make this editable by depressing this key, and I can go into my polygon mode and select all my polygons. Then I can come up to Simulate, Hair Objects, Add Hair. Okay, so right now if I take a render of this, here's what we get. Okay, just a big ball of hair. All right, so if I take the sphere, what I can do is I can add an animation tag and vibrate. So in this vibrate tag, I'll enable position and just start playing around with some of these parameters. And let's hit play. So right away, you see that this hair is very dynamic. So right now, you can see that that hair moves with that sphere. Okay, we can go into this hair properties, and we could change the length of this hair. We could change the count of the hair. So right now we're at 50,000. What if we took it down to 25,000? When we render this, it's going to start getting a little bit thinner. We could take it down to 15,000. See what that looks like. Compare it to the previous ones. So it's starting to get a little bit thinner. So now we can go into this hair properties material, double click this, and we can start changing these parameters. So you could change this color to one of your colors that you picked out in the beginning of this series. You could change this other color to something else that's within your color scheme. If you wanted specular, you could have that on. You could turn it off if you wanted. You could change the thickness of this hair, so it's thicker at the roots, a little bit thinner down here at the tips. And other things that you could do is you could play around with like this frizz. You could play around with this amount. So when I take a render now we get this frizzy kind of look. If I hit play, dynamics will be enabled. And now we get this hair kind of bouncing around everywhere. All right, so just get this looking at more realistic, what you need to do is add a light. So if I add a light in the scene, and let's just pull this up here. What I'm going to do with this light is just enable shadows. So I'll just turn on soft shadows because they render pretty quick. And now we get these really nice shadows on this hair, and it starts to look more realistic. So you might find this technique useful. You might have some elements in your scene that could use some hair or some dynamics with this hair kind of moving all around. Add some more movement to your animation. If you don't find it useful, you don't have to incorporate it. Okay, it's just an extra little tip that I wanted to show you guys. In this video, I wanted to show you how to use Espresso to create additional animation. So the way that this works is you can have one object's parameter, let's say this cube. If we move it up and down or side to side, we can have that movement drive another geometry's parameter, like position, scale, or rotation. Right? So if I create another piece of geometry, let's say a capsule, and I move this over, I'll just scale this down a little bit. So what I could do here is I could take this cube, and let's say in this coordinates tab, so let's say we take the Z position. So as I move this front to back, this cube, I'll drive another parameter of this capsule. So let's take this cube and this position Z. I'm going to click on it, right click, expressions, and I'm going to say set driver. And then I'll go into this capsule, and let's say we want this capsule to rotate this way. So if I take this rotation B, I can go to expressions and do set driver absolute. So now when I take this cube, when I move this cube front to back, that capsule rotates. Okay, so that's going to give us this espresso tag. If I double click this, what we'll be able to do, click the range mapper. Then down here in this attributes manager, you could specify how much that you want this cube to rotate. So I could take this output upper down. So now when I move this cube, it rotates a little bit slower. Okay, if you wanted it to rotate faster, you just increase this number. All right, so that's the way that you can control that. And now you can create additional geometry. What if you had, let's say, a cylinder and you wanted to drive the cylinder's rotation as well? You can do the same thing. If you go to the cylinder, take this RB, set driven absolute. Now when you move this, again, you get some rotation in that. So I can click on this espresso tag of the cylinder, again, to go to this range mapper, and I could do something like a -20. So it goes in the opposite direction of the capsule. And now with that together, now you can take all of this. What if you took a MoGraph cloner and you drop this capsule into a cloner? And now you could take this into radial mode, change this, and push this out a little bit, increase the number, and now none of these clones are working. Okay, so what you need to do is go into this cloner and uncheck reset coordinates. So now when you move this cube, it rotates with that. So this is a really easy way that you can get a lot of animation in your scene very quickly by using Espresso. Okay, and now if you wanted to, you can drop this cylinder inside of a cloner. I'll just go ahead and duplicate that cloner, drop the cylinder in there, and I can offset this. And now when I move this cube, so I can animate this cube. So let's just say at frame 0, I have a keyframe for this cube. At frame 30, I have another keyframe for this cube. At frame 15, I could just bring it out a little bit, add another keyframe. So here's what that looks like. And now I can take this cube and I can go into my F curve, and it's just the position Z. I can grab all my keyframes, function, track after, repeat after, and now I have this looping animation that continues to animate. All right, so that's another way that you can get a lot of geometry animated very quickly. If you find this useful, use it. If not, if it doesn't work for your scene, then you don't have to use this portion. So once you have all the elements that you want animated in your scene, now you're going to want to go through and animate some cameras and move around your scene with some interesting compositions. So let's go ahead and create a new null, and we'll just call this cameras. And we'll just drop this down here, take the camera that we made before, drop that in here, and I'll enable this camera so I can see it. And now with this composition grid, I'm going to have this grid on so I can kind of compose my shot a little bit nicer. So let's say we want this thing to start right here, and we want it to focus on these spheres. We could turn everything else off for the time being and keep this opening super simple. So we're going to use these cameras in conjunction with a stage object. So if I go down here where the sky is, I just create a stage object, drop that underneath my camera, and now at keyframe 0, I'm just going to take my camera 01, let's rename this, take my stage and just drop this camera into the camera field and depress this little icon right here to add a keyframe. All right, so now we can hit play. So right around here is where this first intro animation is ending. All right, so let's take this camera and we're going to animate this position. So let's say this camera wants to start here. We can add a keyframe, and right around this frame right here, we could just take this camera and we could just move it closer to those spheres. And then we can add another keyframe. So what ends up happening here is that camera just slowly moves towards those spheres. Okay? And then we can create a second camera. So let's say we have another camera view, and this is camera 2. And right around this keyframe, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the stage object, and we're going to drop this camera 2 in there. All right, so now we could take this camera 2 and maybe focus on this water or something, or focus on those glowing spheres that are going to start popping up. All right, it's up to you how you want to compose this. But at this point, we can go in here and we could start turning some of these elements on and off. Okay, and the way that we're going to do that is just go back to the beginning. So we know for the intro animation, we want to have this thing on right now. So let's go to the basic properties. We'll say visible and editor on, visible and renderer on. We'll add 2 keyframes. All right, and then let's go to the stage object, and right around here is when this camera view changes. So let's go back into this intro animation, and we'll go here and turn this off. Okay, so these spheres are on, and these cubes are on under the water, all the way up to where this camera changes. All right, so the second camera view, once that happens, and again, compose this camera, animate it however you want. Once this happens, we can go to this grid and spheres, turn those on. We can go to this background element, turn that on. So right here, say on, animate that. The background on, and we can animate that. We'll step back 1 keyframe, and we'll change all of these to off. So as that stage object changes and the camera view changes, so do our elements. Our elements get turned on and off. So I just wanted to show you how I animated these cameras in this video. So basically, we start with this. That camera zooms in closer to those spheres. Then it changes to an overhead view, then to a front view with all these spheres popping up, a side view. This is kind of under the water, looking up. There's another view of it panning. Then it zooms into here, these background elements, created some additional geometry back here, some additional geometry over here. And then it just kind of slowly fades in to all this action. And then for the end, another overhead view. And then another simple animation. I included some of these hair elements on the ends here. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. But if it makes sense for your animation, go ahead and do it. And then it just ends here, and I fade it out in post-production. Okay, let's go ahead and add lighting to our scene. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab a background object. And on this background object, I'm just going to grab a material that only has color and no reflection. There we go. So right now, if I take a render of this, so right now we don't have any lighting in the scene, no shadows or no intense lights. So I'm going to keep this light setup really simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new spotlight. And then I'll take that spotlight, I'll rotate it. .90 degrees. And then I'll just bring this up. I'll make sure that that's over these spheres. Bring that up. There we go. So let's take a quick render of this. So now I'm getting some light over top of this. So now let's create some fill lights to fill in some of these darker areas. There's a fill light here. Let's kind of push that over a little bit. Push that up. And I'm going to take this fill light, go to general, and I'll just bump this intensity down, maybe change the color a little bit, add some more color in here, and the color is completely up to you. And I'll take this, Command C, Command V, take that fill light, fill in some of these areas over here. Maybe I can add a little bit of green to this one, take another test render. So now that's starting to fill in everything else around here. Still our landscape's a little bit dark. We can compensate for that by increasing some of this fill light if we wanted to, increasing the intensity. Let's see what happens now. So now some of this is getting filled in a little bit more. So you want to go through, light your scene, keep it super simple. In my scene, I don't even have any shadows that I turned on any of the lights. That way it optimizes render time. So go through, light everything, make sure you have some nice illumination on all your objects. So at this point, we're ready to render. So let's go to our render settings, and we'll specify output. You can use the standard renderer. On output, I would recommend 1280 by 720, and then you go to frame range, all frames, specify a save path. We're going to do format.mov or MP4, and then you're going to specify a save path here. We'll call this music video, whatever you want to call it. Hit save. Let's do an alpha. And this little button right here, this icon, include sound, you want to have this unchecked before you render. Okay? You don't want to render out sound through Cinema 4D. We're going to composite that later in After Effects. And then for anti-aliasing, you want to go from geometry to best. And then what you'll do is hit this button, render to the picture viewer, and wait for it to get done. Sometimes it's best to just let this run overnight because it could take a long time, 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever. I had a lot of animation in mind, so mine took on one computer about 100 hours to render. So you just want to keep that in mind. You know, your computer will be tied up for a long time. Okay, let's do some post-production work in After Effects to add some finishing touches to our animation. So in the project window, let's just go ahead and double click. And we'll import our files. Then we'll create a new folder and just call this assets. We'll drop these into that folder just to help tidy everything up, keep it clean. We'll take this video, drop it into our project timeline. We'll double click again and we'll import our final music soundtrack. So I'll just import this full track, and we don't need this for right now. So what I'll do is what I'll do next is I'll create a new layer. I'll just create a new adjustment layer. With that selected, I'll go to Effects and Noise and Grain. You can play around with these parameters for whatever you want, whatever you think looks good. I'm just trying to create a little bit of detail in the background sky area. Okay, so play around with this, see what you like, see what works best for your scene. Just use this one for now, and what we could do is we could turn this mode, if you're not seeing that mode, just to press this middle icon right here. And we could play around with some of these. Screen, that's going to lighten everything up. We could do a multiply, see what that looks like. That darkens everything up. An overlay, I think that's going to work good. So I'm going to hit T on the keyboard and just bring that opacity down. And that's just going to give me a little bit of detail in that sky. And now I want to mask that out so it's not affecting these mountains. So I'll take this alpha channel that we rendered out and put it on top of this layer. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this layer, and I'll just call this fractal. And then we're going to want to take this track mats, okay, this right here, where it says none. I'm going to choose Luma Inverted Matte Video A. So now what that does is actually masks out all these areas, the landscape and the water. So all this fractal noise is only happening in the sky area. And I can hit T on the keyboard again. Maybe I need to bring it down in opacity just so it's kind of subtle. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do after this is I'm going to create a blur. So where the action is happening, where this main sphere is, I'm going to have that be in focus and everything else a little bit blurred out. So an easy way to do that is just go Layer, New, and again we'll create an adjustment layer, and I'll rename this Blur. So now with that layer selected, I'll go to Effect, I'll go to my Blur and Sharpen, and I'll choose a Gaussian blur. And we can repeat these edge pixels and add some blur to our scene. So you'll see everything's starting to get a little bit blurry, okay? So now we don't want everything to be blurry in our scene, and I'm going to bump this blurriness up a little bit just so it's easier to see. I'll probably turn it down after I mask everything out. So with this layer selected, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to choose an ellipse tool. So what this ellipse tool is going to do is it's going to add a mask to this layer. So as you can see, the sphere is blurry, but everything else in the background is in focus. So I'll take this mask and I'll click this inverted tab. So now we don't want this to have a really sharp edge, so we'll unfold this, and where it says mask feather, I'll just drag these little sliders, and now that mask feathers out a little bit. So now I'm going to animate this mask path. So I'll add a keyframe to keyframe 0, and right here I'm going to have that mask just kind of move along with where the action is. Alright, and now I can do page down, and right here what I can do is just take this down and just have this sort of focus on some of these spheres right above this water, right? So here's where the focus of this little scene is in this camera move. Move that over and then scrub through. So maybe right here, I want this to be in focus in the center of the screen and blurred out on the edges. And then here, we could do a page down on the keyboard until we get to the exact frame we want. So right here, I'm going to change this again to just kind of encompass the main action area of our scene. Okay, so if you zoom in, you'll notice we're getting a lot of blur over here on these edges, and then as we move it in, we get a lot of crispness. All right, so you just want to go through and animate this mask. So I can add another keyframe here, page down, and then I'll change this again. So maybe right here, this portion is in focus, and it kind of fades out a little bit on the edges. Okay, go through and mask the rest of that out. Then once you're done with that, we can also solid. And now what I can do with this color picker is choose a dark color and hit OK. That's going to fill this with a dark layer. All right, so I can go back to my blur, and now I can just copy this mask. I can hit Command C and then go to my layer, Command V, and now I have that exact blur and vignette happening in the same. If I wanted to do that, I mean, you don't have to do that. You can have the vignette be totally custom on this one. So if you want to create a custom vignette, you just go back up to here and you create another layer mask. And then what you can do is unfold this mask, feather this out, you can invert it, and then you can go to this mode, multiply, hit T on the keyboard for opacity, bring that down. So that's just a subtle little vignette on the edges, okay? After this, what we could do is we could create a glow effect. So where some of these things are glowing, you know, where these spheres start popping up, let's create another layer. Let's go layer new, and we can do an adjustment layer. In this effects presets, we could search for glow, and let's just take this glow, drop it onto here, and you'll notice right away we get this really nice glow happening. So we'll go to this glow threshold, maybe bump that up to get some of that color back in those spheres, and we can do the glow radius. So now these things are starting to like radiate some light, which looks really cool. All right. So we're starting to get some glow down here as well. Starting to get some glow up here in these spheres. It's looking real nice. And we could toggle this on and off to see how it's affecting our scene. So if I toggle this on and off, you'll notice, you know, it's a pretty dramatic effect that we're getting here. And especially in this scene, you can really see it. If I zoom in, toggle it on and off, that's a really nice look right there. And then once you get to your end, you know, you could fade this thing out with another type of layer. So if you go up here, let's go ahead and rename this one because we didn't, glow. Let's go layer new solid, and again I'm going to choose a color from within here. And right around here, I'm just going to animate this thing fading to black. Okay, so we could start the fade right around here. We'll hit T on the keyboard, depress this, bring that to 0, and just kind of scrub through the timeline, bring that up to 100. All right, and one last little thing that we could do is we could add a curves adjustment to the top of this. So if I go layer new, adjustment layer, I'll rename this curves, effect, color correction, curves. So now we could start playing with some of the final look of this. So if we wanted the entire thing to be a little bit brighter, I'm just taking my midtones, bumping those up a little bit. Okay. We can go into this channel. We can go to our reds. If we want more red in the scene, we can bump this up over here. You know, that kind of looks cool because these edges are getting a little bit more of that purple color from our fill lights. What if we went into the green channel? We could start playing around with some of this stuff. Maybe we don't need any of this green. You know, we could play around until we're happy with it. If we go into the blue channel, that looks kind of cool right there. Go back into our RGB. What if we increase some of this contrast, just to kind of give it a little bit more visual interest. Let's see what happens here. So with the curves on and off, now you see we're getting a lot more contrast to this. All right, and to finish this off, what I'll do is once this thing fades out, I'll just add a text with some information on here. So animation by in your name. And then what we can do is we could turn on this title action safe. We could take this layer and we could center this up over here. You could choose a font, tweak this however you want. So what if this animation by, that's a regular font. and then your name is a little bit bolder. We could turn off this title action safe. And now in this text, we can unfold this and we can animate, let's say, the opacity. So if I go into here and unfold this range selector, we could turn the opacity to 0. And now I can animate the start position to finish it off. So right here, where this black comes in or fades to black, I could start this range selector animation for a few seconds. So now that end card is animated. There we go. And now the last thing we need to do is just drop in our file for our soundtrack on top of here. And then we will select all our layers, composition, add to render queue. And now we're going to we'll go to the best settings, specify best full, and leave that as it is. We'll go to this lossless, where it says format options. We'll choose a video codec. So I'll choose this first one. That'll compress it a little bit. And format options for the audio. If you have another codec, you can add a codec in there as well. And then you want to specify an output path. Okay, you can save this to your project folder or whatever you want. Name it your first initial, last name, underscore, name of the project. Hit save, and now you're going to want to hit render and wait for that to finish.